All right, so the next project we're going to tackle is the ceiling in the kids' bedroom. And so last week we did the walls, and we've done these walls in 1/2-inch plywood that we've chamfered in so that they look like tongue and groove, but they're actually just sheets of plywood. So the issue, we want this to look like a continuation up and over so that it all matches the walls. But the issues we have is this back piece here is all metal. So under here, this is a thin layer of insulation that we've put up, but underneath it, it's all a big piece of metal. And so there's no real way to attach these. These we had furring strips and we could use brad nails and glue to get them on there and get them secure. But up here we don't have that. So that's one issue, is that we don't want to see a bunch of hardware. We could just put screws everywhere, but we don't want to do that. We'd rather have a nice clean look. And so the other issue is the 1/2-inch will not bend to this radius. So this is too much of a curve for the 1/2-inch. We were able to bend the very last piece on the sides, but we had to do so many curves and it just barely bent. And so we don't want to do that with the roof because it's too hard, and the kerfing, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. We're not terribly good at it. So what we're going to do for the roof is attack it with 2 1/4-inch thinner sheets of plywood. And so the first 1/4-inch sheet will go down and it will work sort of like the furring strips in that we can attach the other pieces to that piece without hardware. So the bottom layers we can go ahead and screw in with some countersink screws that will lay flush against the wood and not interfere with the top, and then come back then with our finishing layer of 1/4-inch and then go down and glue and brad nail that right up to the right up flat against it. And so with the 2 1/4-inch layers, it should be very, very close to the 1/2-inch thickness. So it will all look like a similar thickness, but this will actually be comprised of 2 layers. So all right, so we got our first piece of the underlayment in the ceiling successfully. It was able to bend, and it bent really nicely. This plywood bends really nicely in one direction. The other way it doesn't bend. So what we did was we took another piece and we did as many parallel slats as we could going into the ceiling. And you'll see that this is relatively flat, but then it starts to curve. And not only does it curve, it like comes in kind of like a ball. So straight pieces are not going to make sense. So what we did was we took our last, what we thought would be our last straight piece, which was the 6th piece here, and we laid it across. And then what we did was we just lined it up, and then we just measured where the next one would naturally curve when we pushed it up against the ceiling. And we did that for every subsequent piece, keeping the lines parallel back here as much as we could, and then making all the taper come in here at the bottom. And so that's what we've marked out for every single one, just so we could kind of get a visual of what to expect when we have to cut this wood. And it's not, I don't think it's going to be very easy, but you can kind of see what it looks like. It just sort of goes into the corner. So we think it's going to look kind of neat, but it's gonna be pretty challenging to put up. Okay, so we finished with the first half of the ceiling back here in the kids' room. And our goal for this was by the time they got to here at the very ends, that they would be straight and these would all be the same, and then they could just go straight back. So what we did there is we took and made all the curve in this part here to get it to curve down. So it's not perfect, but we're hoping that the top layer will be a little bendier and will contour a little nicer. We can also sand these if we need to. We can just kind of give it a sand to smooth it all out. That's one nice thing about the wood. And so our next step will be to do from here back to this back wall here. And as we said, those should be relatively straight. So the only curve we have to deal with is the curve that goes this way instead of the rounding that the back had. So it should be, we're hoping, significantly easier. This took us quite a while. And so we've gone in, we've followed the same pattern, and what we were hoping was, since these are all 4 inches, we could just straight back 4 inches. And for the most part, that has proven to be true. But as we start curving, it's getting less and less true. So we're having to deal with it a little bit. One thing to note is we had to make a cutout for our fan. This has a plastic shrouding that will go around it and it will cover all of these edges. Another thing is you can see our light holes now, how they sort of work, and then this wire run that may have looked a little weird before. So this light goes here, and then these wire runs will go in there for those cables. The other thing to note is this little tab here. And so because there is such a long span, this is still the metal roof, and here's our first furring strip. So this is a pretty good size span. The wood was a little too flexible, and so what we had to do is put these little ties in so that it would kind of bind the wood together, and that's been working out good to keep it from sagging and make it look good. So we've been continuing to work here. It's not as exciting as the curvy part. It's not as hard, but it still has presented its own set of challenges. So we're gonna go ahead and continue doing that, and then we'll start on this side, which has no fantastic fan, so hopefully that will go a little bit smoother. So we'll just have one light to do here, and then the rest of them should just be the straight pieces of wood, so hopefully it won't give us too much trouble.
All right, so we finished the underlayment part of our ceiling in here in the kids' room, and it went really well. Like, once we kind of got the hang of each part of it, we got it all smooth. It looks really good. You can see how now it gives us a nice clean finish against our wall, which was this was really why we put up our walls first before we did like the sides and the ceiling, because we wanted that nice, really clean, smooth line there. But everything looks really good. One thing we're doing is that where we have wires on like this bottom row, this is kind of the end of our wire run from the front of the bus all the way back. And all of these lower levels are going to be removable. This is what we did if you watch the videos when we built our closet and our pantry. The bottom slat is going to be removable. And so that's why this one isn't screwed in yet, because the top layer will be attached to this, and then that whole piece will be screwed in and removable. So all the rest of it, though, now that that's going to be our next part, is the top layer, and the top layer is now all just going to be glued and brad nailed into this. So we won't see any hardware. It'll look just like this, hopefully. But so we've been testing out how this is going to look, and we've taken a couple of our pieces that we're going to use for the top. We just cut them small and practiced the chamfer on them to see how this would lay. And you can see now that we have like our 2/4 inch pieces, they will just smoothly transition into our 1/2 inch wood here. We are going to paint the ceiling white, so kind of right here where it makes that transition, it'll go from natural to white. But other than that, it's all smooth, it's flat, the chamfers are even, and so that will be the next part of our process. And one other thing we tested out then, just to make sure it fit the way we expected it to, was our lighting in these holes. So these are the little lights that we're going to use. Now this was just cut in some scrap wood so the hole's not centered on. When we actually do this, all the lights will be centered on a board. But these are just the little LED lights we're using. They're really short, but they're like, the depth is just under 1/2 inch, so they fit just perfectly in here. So, you know, if we run the wires up in our little track here, we can just pop that right in, and then our lights will fit right in there. Everything will be nice and smooth. All right, so we started working on the main part of the ceiling now, and what we did was we took our big sheets of 1/4 inch plywood home and pre-painted like the big old sheets before we ripped it into the 4-inch slats, because well, we just thought that would save us a little bit of time to pre-paint those. But we are going to have to go back now that we have ripped them and then chamfered the edges and just run a layer of paint in those little grooves in there. And that's sort of the way we have to do it, since we're custom cutting each piece with the tapers. But that should be a lot easier than having to like paint all of this overhead and try and get a nice smooth finish. So basically now that we have the underlayment done, we're able to do these all in one big huge piece. It's just slightly less than 8 feet long. And so we've just got the 2 pieces up so far. So we're just gluing it all, we're gluing painting glue on the back of our strips, putting them up, and then just nailing them in. And we should have done this from the start, which is to nail into the sides of the grooves instead of just into the face of the board. We could have done that over here on the walls. We realize now, I don't know why we didn't. Sometimes we just kind of get on a path and one-track mind to just go. And so we have kind of started doing it that way down here. And so we have a couple big brad nail holes down here. And, you know, our plan was, well, we can just kind of patch those up, sand them and touch up paint those areas. And then Ron's like, wait a minute, why don't we try just nailing them into the groove and see? I mean, it's only 1/4 inch. We weren't sure if it would actually hold very well, but yeah, he was able to get his nail gun right up in there and start nailing into the grooves. And so now that's how we did all of the rest of it. So yeah, I'm still gonna have to touch up just those, you know, 5 brad nails, but on all the rest of it, we shouldn't have any holes anywhere to touch up, and all I'll have to do is paint in the grooves, and that should be pretty easy, and we'll have a nice smooth ceiling, which is exactly what we wanted.
Okay, so what we did, what we found out was the 14 gauge wires were too thick for this channel and for the lights to sit nicely. And so what we've done is replaced those with 18 gauge cable. On this side, we went ahead and pulled them all the way through, and the wire nut is up in behind this, the fan, so the Max Air fan. It's up in kind of towards the rear of the bus is where all of them, and then we have all the extra cable here. So if we pull a light out and we got to pull the cable down to replace one of these lights or something and resolder one in, what we have to do is we'll have to pull this down, and then there's all the excess cable is up here. And so we've pulled it all really tight. So if we pull these down, you'll see there's hardly any extra. So anyway, they come out fairly easy, but they seem to stick okay. Anyway, we've done the same thing here. And so what we did here was it was too late. so what we did was we capped off these 2, and then we're gonna put them all the way up in there. And then these 2, since these are all in common anyway, these 4 lights are all in common. So these 2 we're gonna take and push this guy back in there. And so now we'll just have these 4 coming out here. And that should be fine. So that should be fine for here. And that allows us enough room with these skinnier wires that the lights will fit nicely. So future selves, that's what we did back here. All right, so we've started using a new tool. So before we were taking these planks and overlapping them, and what would happen is we would kind of damage the planks and it was hard to get a perfect lineup on them. And what was really happening is back here, it was starting to spread further and further apart. And so what we've done now is we've taken a piece of board and we've cut out a section that would be the part that tapers in. So none of the boards taper in less than about 2 inches or so, even these extreme ones in the corner. And so what we've done is we've taken these boards and we've cut out most of it and just left 1.5 inches. And so what the 1.5 inches does is it works as a little guide. So what we can do now is keep this perfectly aligned with this, push it down into the curve, and then we don't have to worry about it overlapping with the other board. Now we see how it kind of fits in, and now this piece back here still fits perfectly flat. So that was the problem we were having before, is it was starting to open up. And so now we can take our pencil, now that we have this curved in, and we can push this against the wall so that it lies as flat as it can, and then just trace it. And there we have our line to make measurements off for the next piece to cut the taper. All right, so we're getting ready to install these little lights. So the small lights that we've chosen for most of the lighting in the bus are these tiny little LED lights. And so here you can see we've installed them already on this side. And the thing is, they're so thin, the profile is so small that our 1/2 inch ceiling, even though there's a metal ceiling under here, the 2 1/4 inch pieces of wood is enough to get these to fit nice and snug and flush against the ceiling. And so there isn't a big problem. So you saw the channels that we dug out are enough for these little wires, and then when we install them, we just tuck the wires back in and push the light up. So if we ever have to change them out, we just pop them down, we'll cut the leads. So we're soldering these in with the marine grade heat shrink, and so that'll keep them nice and secure. We'll solder these in, and there's 4 in this bedroom. So this is the first, there's 4 per side on this bedroom. So this is the first set of circuit lights that we're putting in. So we've actually tested them on these, and I'll go ahead and turn them on so you can see, but they light up the room quite a bit. All right, so we've turned them on, and you can see that they are pretty bright. So this is about, there's 4 on this side, and there'll be 4 over here, and they seem to be working out quite well. So we'll have a link for these in the description. I think we just got them on Amazon. They're relatively cheap, but they are aluminum housings, so they look pretty nice, and they put out a nice warm light. I think they're 3000 K on the color spectrum. We're about 95% done. We did the lights, obviously. We have those on here. And these are controlled by 2 different circuits, so we can operate the left and the right side independently. The last thing to do is we're gonna fill a little bit of, whether there's some gapping in some of these, we're gonna fill it a little bit with caulking. Not enough to take away the chamfer, but enough to kind of fill it in. Some of the places had a little bit too much gapping, and then we'll paint. So we'll paint all of these chamfered edges.
All right, we finally finished this ceiling in the kids' room. It was a long process of tapering and trying not to break pieces and kerfing and all the templates and painting and all of it. With both layers of the ceiling. It was a really long process. I think in total for the walls, both layers of the ceiling, plus the paint and like all the caulking and paint that we did in the grooves, I think it took us close to 4 weekends. I mean, we had some other family things going on as well, but I think it took us like 4 weekends to finish all of this. So it was a lot. It was a slow process getting each one of on both layers, like each of the curves in here correct, but we are super happy with how it turned out. We think it actually looks better than we anticipated it looking, all the curves, and then where it meets up with the wall in the back is a nice clean finish against the wall, and the lights look great. We got the little shroud up over our fan, which needs to be cleaned. But overall, we are super happy with how the kids' room is starting to shape up. It actually feels like we now have the shell of a room, and we're just super excited with how it looks, but mostly just super excited that we are done with it. It was hard. So I think the next thing we get to move to is the kids' beds, and they're super excited about that, and we're excited about that, and we just can't wait to make this little room a home for them.